Let's get to our first conversation today. As always, we have two conversations for you, both very interesting. But let's start with this, that it was on November 24th, 2023, that the Central Bank of Nigeria's governor, Mr. Olayemi Cardoso, first announced the Apex Bank's plan to recapitalize banks. Now, he laid out ambitious plans to get the sector significantly drive growth of businesses and support the federal government's $1 trillion economy project. Now, analysts have lauded the success of the two-year exercise and expressed confidence that with bigger and more resilient banks, the Nigerian financial sector has what it takes to drive sustainable growth and real sector productivity. When the CBN governor, Mr. Olayemi Cardoso, asked banks to brace up for a new round of recapitalization in the sector, many pundits foresaw an idea whose time had come. Expectedly, the CBN boss walked the talk and set the two-year timeline for the exercise. March 31st signaled the end of the timeline and beginning of an era, with 33 resilient and highly capitalized banks raising 4.65 trillion naira and determined to drive business and economic growth. The recapitalized banks will play a significant role in the federal government's drive for the $1 trillion gross domestic product target by 2031. Mr. Cardoso also said that Nigerian banks needed to raise new capital to have sufficient capital relative to financial systems needs to service a $1 trillion economy and near future. Now, let's talk to my guest. My guest is Mr. Bismarck Rewane. He is the Managing Director of Financial Derivatives Company Limited. He joins us this Good Friday to discuss on all of these issues and some other issues affecting Nigeria's economy. Mr. Rewane, good afternoon and happy Good Friday to you.
Happy Good Friday to you and viewers. Thank you for having me.
All right, then. I guess we should start with your take with regards to the just concluded recapitalization exercise as being put through by the Central Bank of Nigeria. What do you make of it and the outcome of this process?
Let me put it clearly that we are not surprised that the banks met the recapitalization at the deadline. What it does tell you is that the banks have enough buffers now to withstand whatever shocks, either internal or exogenously induced. So complying at this time, when the world is in a state of shock, is also, it's also timely. Now, having said that, let us be clear. I think the central bank, in terms of governance and system-wide surveillance, has done a great job. Don't forget, Nigeria has been removed from the gray list of illicit flows. The currency has stabilized, and this gap between the parallel and the official market has narrowed to what we call the comfort zone. So generally speaking, one can say, as a stabilizing institution, as an institution focused on the primary goal of maintaining price stability, the central bank has come out clearly. Also, this as a preemptive move, not knowing at the time when they put these regulations in, that the world will be traumatized by exogenous shocks, it also makes it clear that we have a financial regulator who is also proactive and strategic. I think that is said and done. But let us not be confused that the fact that the bank is highly capitalized does not mean that it's well managed. The management of the bank is a different process. There are many banks that failed who were highly capitalized, but could not withstand the stress of pressures that came from unexpected sources. That is good, but it is important now that how do the banks convert this capital into financing activities and growth and output? That's a big question. If you have CRR of 45%, which means that for every 100 naira I deposit in the bank, the central bank takes 45 naira at zero cost. The banks are, going to be, constricted, and actually they will not have the motivation to lend. So the first thing we have to see, and we would like to see, is that a gradual reduction in the CRR ratio and incentives to allow the banks participate in real sector lending and avoid just lending money to the federal government through buying of bonds. I think that is a very, very important requirement at this time. So, one, kudos to the central bank, and also kudos to the banks themselves for having enough capital. The real test now is how do we manage the resources and how do we manage the financial system so that it can now serve as an impetus for growth, employment, and distribution of income, equitable distribution of income.
Thank you so much. In managing these resources, which will be my next question, as where the real sector comes in, you also talked about that. Manufacturers, industry players believe that they should be able to access funds more, but the rates are something on the other side, considering what is even happening globally that's affecting the crude oil market and, of course, inflation. What do you make of, how do we balance this? Talking about getting the funds for the real sector. And of course, we have some rates set by the Apex Bank.
Well, the rates of interest are not determined in isolation of inflation. So when you have a high rate of inflation, then you have to use interest rates as one of the tools to manage inflation and bring about price stability. So what are the facts? The facts are that inflation had risen all the way to about 32%. It has come down sharply, partly because of the change in methodology and base year. But now let us assume that is correct, and that's about 15%. So you've actually come down sharply. Now, how do you now bring down interest rates without threatening two things? One, the value of the currency, and two, what we call an overheated economy, which has transmission effect into the real sector. So I think directionally, inflation and interest rates are moving in the same direction, but the quantum of change required to bring interest rates down to a point where it does not destabilize the economy as a whole is another issue, and that's been addressed. Don't forget, our neighbor, Ghana, had inflation as high as 55% 3 years ago. They actually defaulted on their Euro bonds. Investors took a haircut. But ever since, Ghanaian inflation has come all the way down to 5%, and interest rate, policy rate there is still at 15%. So you can achieve this thing, but you just have to be patient. So like they say at times, investors want patient capital that can wait and get a return. But having said that, I think the whole idea about inflation is productivity gains as against money supply growth. Money supply growth is down to 12%, while GDP growth is generally about 4%. So there's still a gap there. And so what do we do to increase productivity and output? Number one, important policy or structural issue is that you cannot grow this economy and increase productivity with 4,000 megawatts of power. It's not possible, right? So there must be a structural, a power revolution in Nigeria, where power supply must go from 5,000 or 4,000 megawatts all the way to about 20,000 megawatts in the short run. And how do you do this? You do that with part forbearance, privatizing the transmission company, and actually basically dismantling the power structure as we see them today. Also, remember that renewable energy is now cheaper than fossil fuel energy, right? So we need to see, one, an increase in solar energy, increase in hydro, increase in use of wind, and also, like I said, from forbearance for the people who have invested in the power, the grid, and generation, transmission, and distribution. Technically speaking, the distribution companies, the transmission companies, and the GenCos are probably, if you look at it, they are technically insolvent and probably bankrupt. So you've got to restructure that whole area, write off the debts, and so that the banks, right now, bank earnings are being are subdued by the provisions they're making for power sector loans. So if you solve the power sector loans, I think the president has alluded to the fact that he's ready to give forbearance of about 2 to 4 billion naira, 2 to 4 trillion naira, while what is required is about 6 trillion naira. So the worst thing to do in lending is to lend money to somebody not as much as required. So we must come to the conclusion that 6 trillion naira is what is required. 6 trillion naira has to be managed and put into the system in an efficient manner so that Nigeria can begin to generate something like almost, in the short run, 8 to 10 to 15,000 megawatts. Remember that every 1,000 megawatts increase in power translates into about 0.01 GDP growth rate. So if you do 10,000, you can increase your GDP by about almost 2%. If you do that, 2% of the GDP of this country is exactly almost the figure that you mentioned now, 4 trillion naira of market capitalization of the banking system. So we can't do anything except we do something about power and security.
Very important. Now, this program, again, recorded strong participation from both local and domestic investors. For domestic investors, about 72.55% and 27.45% for international banks. Now, what does this speak to? What does it mean for our economy? Talking about investor confidence and all of that. Are we still getting online with regards to that? Because when I checked the last capital importation, I beg your pardon, sorry, just a minute. I saw that we did very well, but it was still FPIs, not FDIs. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with you that, you see, the first thing to use to determine and evaluate the performance of the economy is if your existing investors take their rights. So what has happened that the international investors in the banking system all took their rights. They take their rights because they have confidence in the return on investment, in the earnings capacity, in the management, and in the size of the market. So they did that. So one is that, yes, you raised 4 trillion, 72% domestic and almost 30% international, which was the proportion they had before. 2, the international investors are not just fly-by-night investors. You're talking about Standard Chartered Bank. You're talking about the Standard Bank, Stanbic Bank. You're talking about Citibank. You're talking about Rand. And you're talking about 1 or 2 others. So these are not guys who are in the business of losing money. And they have head office who evaluate, one, political risk, business risk, and market risk before they determine when they're going to come in there. So, like we said at the beginning, market capitalization and the size of the market, and also, to a large extent, the quality of the management is what makes the investors stay in. So the way we see it from the analyst community is that this is a good one, and that there's a multiplier effect. Once you have an investment, there's an investment multiplier. Investment multiplier means that even if I invest 10 trillion, the multiplier effect on gross national product is 10 plus the multiplier coefficient. So that is what this means. I think, especially coming at a time when the world is facing these massive exogenous shocks on unexpected events that happened on February 28th.
Great. Let me take it from there, from that, what is happening in the Middle East. And now that could affect Nigeria's recovering economy. You know that we just went through, we are still undergoing reforms, coming out of these reforms, and now this is coming on the heels. Energy prices are now on the high side, and we see what that means for inflation, like we said even earlier. Now, do you think that this could threaten the positives of the ongoing reforms of this administration?
No. The point is that typically, 2 years after reform fatigue sets in, policymakers almost always succumb and embark on ideological backsliding. But this crisis is a great one for Nigeria, because Nigeria is not isolated, Nigeria is insulated, right? And therefore, 4 things that happen. 1, oil price is at 111, 109 for Brent, 111 for WTI, and we were predicating our budget on $64 a barrel, maybe 70. So we are $40 to $45 in the money as far as Nigeria is concerned. And output also will increase. And what does it? It means that government revenue will increase substantially. The big problem is that the people's revenue, right? So there's a government windfall and a people's shortfall. The people's revenue, because they're buying petrol at a higher price at 1,250, they're buying diesel at 1,800, they're buying gas, cooking gas, aviation fuel. So how do you intervene? How do you convert the windfall of government to people's to support the people in their shortfall? Right now, people are underwater. And when you look at the 6-dimensional analysis of the Nigerian economy, almost everybody there is underwater except for government and the politicians. Now, so how do we go about this? My proposal, and most of the economists in the country say, look, there's nothing wrong with subsidies, right? Subsidies have to be targeted at producers who can transfer it to the consumers. If you have a subsidy system like the one that existed before, it is fraught with fraud and all sorts of leakages. So now the federal government of Nigeria sits down with the modular refineries and Dangote refineries. Look, we will sell you crude at price X, but you must ensure that the price of refined petrol, diesel does not exceed Y. Let us use, for example, say 900 naira. When you do that, you actually help, you have used the structure of a refining industry, which is well structured, to pass on the comfort and the windfall to the people. And so, because if you look at it, every 1% increase in the price of petrol translates into a 0.079 increase in inflation. So now that we've got petrol price has increased by 58% in Nigeria, from 700 to about 1,200, or 800 to 1,200, we are expecting almost a 4% increase in inflation. So inflation will go from 15 to about 19%. The IMF is much more generous and says that it will increase by 2.5 to about 17.5%. If inflation goes to 17.5% at the best, or 19% at the worst, you will find that the people will be underwater, and they'll actually, you'll strangulate the consumer class. And you can see that already, that companies are now having packages, miniature packages, so that they can sell alcohol in sachets, cornflakes in sachets. Basically, people are spending less on quantity and actually spending much lower on quality. And it's playing out, as you can see, right now in the healthcare sector. Nigeria is facing a healthcare crisis, Lassa fever, cholera, and all the other things. And the healthcare system is not strong enough to support the people. So my contention is that, one, we go back to a targeted and well-managed subsidy system that can insulate the people from higher prices. We convert some of the windfall into proper investment so that people can come in here and enjoy the benefits of this windfall. Having said that, you remember that Australia has said free public transport for the people. Everybody's intervening. India, Pakistan, everybody's intervening for now, temporarily, so that people can overcome this shortfall. And these are countries that are having shortfalls. We as a country are having a windfall. And therefore, it behoves on us, and we have the responsibility that we manage the windfall efficiently, minimize leakages, cut out all the bureaucracy that is there, and get the government to spend money efficiently. We think that FAC allocation to both the states and federal government will increase by a minimum of 50%. Some have queried that, okay, if the FAC is increasing, why is the government borrowing? I think that's a question that you have to look at in the context of what we call revenue anticipation bonds. The government may want to borrow now in anticipation of the money that will come in, so that they can spend it now, because the value of money today is higher than the value of money in 3 months' time. Should the government be borrowing, willy-nilly? No, I don't agree that we should. Even if you are borrowing or you are using your windfall, it has to be used efficiently so that the people can see the benefit of it. Right now, the people are actually, how would I say, they are suffering and smiling. But let me finish this conclusion that we do not know how long this war would last.
Indeed.
This war started on February 28th. I remember 440 BC, Julius Caesar was told, beware the Ides of March. When you have anything happening in March, you have to be very careful. And so when will the war end? Well, this is a war that has a peculiarity. One, you win by not losing. That's Iran. And for the United States, you lose by not winning. So this is a game that nobody knows how long and what the definition of victory is.
Well, interesting. You took it from me. I wanted to ask for interventions, but you already stated that. Finally, Mr. Rewane, so I let you go. Any role, can Dangote Refinery help bridge any gap in all of this? Talking about price of PMS and all of that. It's also something I wanted you to speak around.
No, let's take some context here.
Okay.
First and foremost, Dangote Refinery paid $500 million in 2007 to buy the Port Harcourt refinery. That contract was cancelled and the transaction was revoked by the Yar'Adua government. So imagine 2007, 20 years later, Dangote now has built a refinery. Of course, it started about 10 years ago to actually fill the gap created by these inefficient government refineries. So one, Dangote Refinery is an investment which is worth $23 to $28 billion. And luckily, it's going to be listed very soon on the exchange and it will increase market capitalization from about 129 trillion to almost 180 trillion naira.
Wow.
Now, that's one. Two, Dangote is refining and has to buy part of its crude from Nigeria and part of the crude internationally. And is producing today something like almost 70 million liters of petrol every day for Nigeria. And so they have the capacity to produce, they have the quality that they are producing, they have embarked on an expansion, and by about 2-3 years' time, Dangote Refinery will be the single largest refinery. Today is the largest single train refinery. Now it will be the largest refinery, bigger than the one in India that belongs to Reliance. So I think they have the capacity. Right now, they are producing and distributing quite efficiently. What would have happened? I want you to imagine, let's do the counterfactual. What would have happened if Dangote Refinery was not there? And then there was this Strait of Hormuz and all, and we cannot even import refined products. There would have been chaos in this country.
Indeed, it's a good way to live it. Go ahead, please wrap up you want to wrap your thoughts.
No, what I'm saying is that, first and foremost, I think we must credit the company for investing at a time when nobody wanted to invest, after being burnt by the same federal government in 2007, 2008. Two, it has kept its focus and has been able to produce and expand at a time when others are running away. You know, Warren Buffett says you should be greedy when people are fearful and be fearful when people are greedy. And I think that's what Dangote is doing. And so we have to encourage him and others like him to invest in these sectors that would drive productivity, growth, and more than anything else, power supply.
Mr. Bismarck Rewane is Managing Director of Financial Derivatives Company Limited. Thank you so much for making our Good Friday an interesting one. Thank you for speaking to us on the program. We appreciate it.
Happy Easter to all of you and the viewers. Thank you very much.
All right then. Cheers.